Shen Xihe married into the Marquis' mansion for 20 years, and the two most frequently spoken words by her husband were, "Madam, I love you so much, you will definitely help me, won't you? Madam, your sister.In.Law is like a mother. You must be respectful and serve her every day." So, she was always obedient to her husband and remained steadfast for 20 years. She would offer her sister.In.Law peace and tea every day, until one day she broke through the affair between her sister.In.Law and her husband and was personally poisoned by her son who had been raising her for 20 years. She didn't realize until her death that she had lived her entire life in the intricacies and schemes carefully planned by her husband. On her wedding night, she secretly accused her of losing her innocence and becoming pregnant. She falsely claimed to be unable to conceive and begged her to have a child. After she gave birth to a child, she also lost her baby. Every night, she became inseparable from her widowed sister.In.Law for many years. Her husband, who had loved her for a lifetime, used her, and her son, who had been raising her with all his heart and soul, poisoned her. The Marquis' mansion, which had supported her with all his wealth, despised her. But she never expected that her most hated rival would cry red in front of her grave. Opening her eyes again, she was reborn in the 6th year of marrying into the loyalty Marquis' mansion. Faced with her harsh mother.In.Law, hypocritical husband, and oppressive sister.In.Law, she is determined to make them fall into disrespect and be despised by thousands of people. Faced with the paranoid Powe King Huo Yunxiao's forced marriage and extortion, she no longer avoided fear, but instead hooked onto his neck and refused to let go. Shen Xihe said, "Yunxiao, in this lifetime, how about I chase you instead?" Huo Yunxiao hugged her waist tightly and said, "I helped you lose your spouse. When will you be willing to marry me?" Chapter 1. Rebirth, Carriage stealing incense. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Bianjing City. At the beginning of the sudden rain, the magnificent carriage of the prince's mansion in Jinbei galloped on the wet long street. The people around were afraid of being disturbed and scattered, bowing their heads to avoid it. Someone whispered, "Have you heard that?" The prince of Jinbei was not willing to let his fiancée be robbed, so he killed him at the loyalty Marquis' mansion and wanted to forcibly capture the crown prince's wife. The car had just left in such a hurry, and I'm afraid he had already succeeded. Inside the carriage, King Huo Yunxiao of Jinbei was holding the woman in his arms, gently caressing the wound on her forehead with his hand, with a hint of greed hidden in his sorrowful eyes. Shen Xihe woke up from the heartbreaking despair and suddenly looked up, facing a pair of abyssal eyes. The owner of the eyes is also like in memory, with sword eyebrows and starry eyes, phoenix eyes exuding power, and extraordinary beauty. Is it an illusion? She trembled as she reached out to the man's face, but was tightly grabbed by the man's wrist within reach. Huo Yunxiao frowned slightly, his cold gaze falling on her and his tone mocking, "Do you still want to seek death? Even if you die, you must die on my king's bed." He pressed his ear and laughed wickedly, "Do you think that without his tacit consent, this king can really forcibly take you away from the loyalty and righteousness Marquis' mansion? It was your good husband Huo Qian who personally delivered you to my king's bed. This is what the Huo family owes me, and I am just trying to reclaim it from them. The person in front of me is the Prince of Jinbei, Huo Yunxiao. He held the status of a commoner in the Marquis' mansion, but in reality, he was an illegitimate child that the emperor could not recognize. Even so, he still relied on his iron and blood wrist to pacify the northwest, made remarkable military achievements, and used his strength to win the fierce figure of the king of another surname for himself. Shen Xihe was momentarily stunned. If it weren't for the real pain coming from her wrist, she couldn't believe she had gone back 14 years. She was reborn. Reborn on the day when Huo Yunxiao was enfeoffed as the queen of Jinbei and came aggressively to settle accounts with Huo Yunxiao. When Huo Yunxiao was still an illegitimate son of the Marquis' mansion, he suffered from complete neglect and harsh treatment. Now that he has risen to become the renowned prince of Jinbei, the Huo family is panicked. They are afraid that Huo Yunxiao will retaliate against the Huo family after returning to the capital, so they buy and kill on Huo Yunxiao's way back to the capital. Unfortunately, Huo Yunxiao not only survived the disaster, but also obtained evidence that the Huo family had plotted against him. And in order to stabilize Huo Yunxiao, the crown prince Huo Qian of the Huo mansion unexpectedly delivered Shen Xihe, who was the wife of the crown prince of the Huo mansion, to Huo Yunxiao's hands. Recalling all the things in the previous life, Shen Xihe suddenly blushed. In her previous life, she hated Huo Yunxiao for bullying and forcibly taking her away. She would rather die than surrender to maintain her innocence. After returning to the Marquis' mansion, her mother.In-law detested her, and her siblings laughed at her. Her seemingly gentle and caring husband was just constantly deceiving and using her. Later, the little emperor personally ruled and the Zhenbei prince's mansion, which had been in power for many years, was defeated. The loyalty and righteousness Marquis' mansion took advantage of this opportunity and made great achievements overnight. Huo Qian finally tore off his disguise and exposed the bloody truth. Huo Qian had no true feelings for her from beginning to end, all through mental control and exploitation, like a vast web that trapped her for life. Shen Xihe was originally the daughter of the Shen family, a merchant in Bianjing, and made a marriage agreement with Huo Yunxiao, the illegitimate son of the Huo family. The engagement was approaching, but Huo Yunxiao went to the border for several years without any news. In order not to give up the money tree of the Shen family, the Huo family broke their previous engagement and allowed Huo Yunxiao's nephew Huo Qian to marry her, becoming the wife of the crown prince of the loyalty Marquis' mansion. However, Huo Qian had already had someone else in his heart, and he had been hooked up with his sister.In-law Lin Qirong for a long time. In order to better control her, Huo Qian deliberately designed a wedding night 6 years ago, which tarnished her and made her pregnant. She wanted to die after losing her innocence, but it was Huo Qian who cried and begged her to live, begging her to keep this child. Huo Qian deceived her by saying that he had injured his body and lost his fertility after chasing a horse before, and that his elder brother died in an accident a few years ago without leaving a son or a daughter behind. If they want to inherit the title in this house, they obviously need a child urgently, so he doesn't mind the origin of this child and will still treat him as his own after the birth of the child. Huo Qian did indeed regard it as if he had given her all kinds of love. She was moved by Huo Qian's magnanimity and felt guilty, obedient to him. Even for the sake of her son, who came from an ignoble background, she worked tirelessly and humbly in the Marquis' mansion, enduring for 20 years. In the end, what she received was her son personally pouring poisonous wine into her. She only then realized that Huo Yuan was the illegitimate son of Lin Qirong and Huo Qian. At that time, she had just given birth to a dragon and a phoenix, and Huo Qian secretly replaced her. The girl was sent to the brothel, and the boy was sent to the beggar's nest. In the end, she died tragically under poisonous wine, becoming a vengeful soul that lingered in the world. She saw with her own eyes that Huo Yunxiao, her most hated rival in her life, had given up the opportunity to make a comeback and broke through the heavy encirclement to enter the loyalty Marquis' mansion, only to seek revenge for her. The crescent white robe was full of bright red, and Huo Yunxiao pulled a young girl named Ru'er to kneel and kowtow in front of her body, shouting every word, "Mother," that made her heart and lungs crack. Later on, Huo Yunxiao was captured, subjected to inhumane torture, and died in a prison, the clouds. Her throat tightened and her tone was sour, yet full of emotions. A pair of jade arms suddenly hooked around Huo Yunxiao's neck, and she pressed her body tightly against Huo Yunxiao's chest, as if embracing the lost and regained peerless treasure. In her previous life, she was afraid of Huo Yunxiao's obsession with love and mistook his fish eyes for pearls. In this life, she only wants to make up for her mistakes and cherish the man who loves her to the bone. Huo Yunxiao's body stiffened slightly, never expecting the woman in his arms to have such an active side. In the past, she avoided herself like a snake or scorpion. Huo Yunxiao looked at her playfully and said, "Didn't you just say you'd rather die than comply? Shen Xihe, don't play tricks." Shen Xihe just hugged Huo Yunxiao tighter. Her voice was muffled, with a mournful tone of grievance. "There's no trick, Yunxiao, I miss you so much. The soft lips followed his Adam's apple all the way up, and the warm breath scattered around his neck, causing a tingling sensation. His heart began to beat uncontrollably. Just as his big hand grabbed onto his delicate waist, he suddenly regained consciousness and pushed away the seductive woman in his arms. His eyes were filled with anger, and his voice was extremely cold. Shen Xihe, for a man who can give you away with an arched hand, how dare you willingly flatter me for him? Then he called the carriage to a stop, his eyes dim, and said, "It's okay, a forced twist is not sweet. I can't see your self-deprecating demeanor. You go." Shen Xihe knew that he had misunderstood. In her past life, no matter how Huo Yunxiao told her the true face of Huo, she refused to believe it. She firmly believed that Huo was the person who truly treated her, and it was normal for Huo Yunxiao to not believe her sudden change. She was anxious and boldly straddled onto Huo Yunxiao's body, shouting forcefully at the coachman, "Keep driving and don't stop." Facing Huo Yunxiao's suspicious gaze, she said devoutly, "It's not for him, I'm for myself. Yunxiao, I don't want to miss you again in this lifetime." Huo Yunxiao stared at her, trying to find a hint of falsehood in her eyes. Shen Xihe chuckled and bit his earlobe, saying, "A twisted melon is not sweet, only by eating it can we know. You probably don't know how to love women, do you? You shouldn't have. You were very skilled that night 6 years ago." Seeing Huo Yunxiao's eyes suddenly startle, she smiled happily and deliberately twisted her waist to seduce. "Maybe it's been a while since I forgot, but it's okay. I'll help you recall." Huo Yunxiao was very surprised and spoke as if losing his confidence, "You already know." Before he could finish speaking, his thin lips were entwined with that delicate softness. Finally, his heart, like a stagnant pool, stirred up turbulent waves. He held on to Shen Xihe's head tightly, and a highly aggressive kiss fell like raindrops. "Take off your clothes, untie your skirt, and the fragrant white jade shoulders fall with red plums." The sound of drizzling rain drowned out the faint moans. Occasionally, the wind blew through a corner of the car curtain, but no one noticed the narrow carriage, with shadows entwined and intersecting. Only the coachman knew that the carriage, which had always been stable, suddenly had some more bumps. Chapter 2. Returning to the mansion, everyone laughs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The journey was lingering until the carriage stopped at the entrance of the prince's mansion in Jinbei, and Huo Yunxiao had no intention of letting her go. She gasped for breath, and the last trace of reason made her ask, "Where's yearsHer? I want to see her." yearsHer is her daughter who was just born and was stolen and sent to the brothel by Huo. The kiss came to an abrupt end. Huo Yunxiao squinted his eyes and looked at her, with a hint of vigilance flashing in his eyes. "So, that's your goal. What happened back then was not my intention to intentionally damage your innocence. I am also one of the victims. I apologize for you, but yearsHer has nothing to do with you." Shen Xihe's face stiffened slightly, but he didn't expect Huo Yunxiao to refuse to let her touch yearsHer. "She's my child, a piece of meat that fell from me." Huo Yunxiao looked at her coldly and asked, "So, in what capacity did you meet her? Is it the wife of the crown prince of the Loyalty and Righteousness Marquis mansion, or her identity as a biological mother? If it is noticed and the situation is exposed, have you ever thought about how she should handle herself?" Seeing Shen Xihe silent, his tone became even stronger. "If you want to be your Marquis lady safely, don't provoke yearsHer. I know you suspect that I was willing to give in to you just to snatch back yearsHer, but what I want to tell you is that since you took over my body on the wedding night 6 years ago, in my heart, I believe you are my husband." Looking at Shen Xihe's determined gaze, he didn't know if he should choose to believe it or not, but it has to be said that he has softened a bit. He raised his lips slightly and deliberately probed, "It's not impossible to see yearsHer, it depends on whether your sincerity is enough." "What sincerity?" "You stay to serve my king. When you can satisfy me, I will agree to your request." His eyes lit up like flames, falling straight on Shen Xihe's body. Shen Xihe bit her lips slightly and said, "How can I satisfy you? It depends on your performance." Candlelight sways and hooks people's souls, while the hibiscus tent warms the spring night. 3 days later, the door finally opened. Huo Yunxiao walked out like a spring breeze, and it was evident that he was very satisfied. But heaven knows how much effort Shen Xihe put into satisfying Huo Yunxiao with this sentence, and the most obvious one is her hoarse throat when shouting. Everyone in the Marquis' mansion was curious, wondering what kind of ability this lady had to keep the diligent prince from leaving the house for 3 days and 3 nights. In the inner room, Shen Xihe rubbed his sore waist and lazily lay on the bed. She couldn't help but secretly feel that Huo Yunxiao was indeed a great general who could pacify the northwest. With his ability to manipulate people, it was estimated that the entire Bianjing city would not be able to find a second one. The maids carried copper pots scattered with rose petals into the room. Although they all lowered their heads, Shen Xihe still saw in the reflection of the bronze mirror that they were all secretly scrutinizing themselves. She thought, if she had been in her past life, wouldn't she have been unable to tolerate the strange looks of others and would have died of shame and anger long ago? In this life, if she can't be brave enough to go out, how can she fight those people who treat her like a snake every day, but are as ruthless as a venomous snake in the dark? After grooming, Shen Xihe was taken to meet yearsHer as he wished. Watching the wet nurse holding a small ball carved with powder and jade standing in the courtyard full of crabapple flowers, Shen Xihe didn't dare to step forward. She just looked from a distance. What echoed in his mind was the question from Huo Yunxiao. "In what capacity did you go to see her?" "Yeah, what should I say when I see you? Now is not the right time. She has no revenge and cannot help but find her son whose whereabouts are unknown. She also needs to put in a lot of effort to find him. She is not a competent mother, and yearsHer doesn't know if her existence might be better." Shen Xihe wiped away her tears and turned around, no longer looking at her daughter whom she had been longing for so long behind her. In the study room, guard Qin Yun replied, "Prince, Madame Huo just glanced at the young lady from a distance and didn't come forward." This news is not surprising to Huo Yunxiao. Without lifting his head, he continued to handle the backlog of official duties in his hand and replied, "She is a smart person. Not going to have any interaction with yearsHer is the greatest protection for yearsHer." Qin Yun took out an envelope from his pocket and handed it over. "This is something that Madame Huo has instructed me to give to you." Huo Yunxiao slowly opened the envelope, and his originally slightly furrowed brow gradually relaxed into a happy expression. "Qin Yun, prepare your horse and enter the palace immediately." Shen Xihe was brought back by a carriage from the prince's mansion in Jinbei. He was very high-profile all the way, and passers-by stared at the carriage and whispered. She got off the carriage under the strange gaze of the crowd. The gatekeeper had intended to remind her to go through the side door, but Shen Xihe stepped directly into the Marquis' mansion from the main door as if there were no people around. "Just as I returned to my yard, before I could have a sip of hot tea, the young lady Lin Qiurong came." Seeing Lin Qiurong, Shen Xihe's heart instantly surged with a strong hatred. In her previous life, this woman caused her family to perish and her flesh to separate. Lin Qiurong is here to deliver messages for the old lady of Songhe Hall. She just waited for Shen Xihe to change clothes for a while, then hurriedly urged him. Sisters and sisters, why don't you hurry up? If you keep procrastinating, it's getting dark and the old lady is still waiting." Maid Chuxue couldn't bear it and approached the guardian, saying, "My young lady has just returned and hasn't had a chance to rest yet. Why is the young lady urging so urgently?" Lin Qiurong glanced at Shen Xihe and sneered, "I didn't think it was thoughtful. After all, my younger siblings have to personally serve people, so my body must be tired. I think it's even difficult to take one more step, right?" As soon as these words were spoken, I saw all the servants around me bowing their heads, as if they were secretly suppressing their laughter. Now, the entire Marquis' mansion knows that on that day, the Prince of Zhenbei came to seek revenge, but forcibly abducted the crown prince's wife, who had not returned for 3 days. It is feared that she had already become unclean. Even if the loyalty and righteousness Marquis' mansion continues to decline in recent years, she will never let such a virtuous woman become the future mother of the Marquis' mansion. Therefore, everyone in the mansion believes that Shen Xihe, the wife of the crown prince, will not be able to sit for long. Moreover, with Shen Xihe's usually weak temperament, no one will flatter her anymore, and even wish to step on her feet again. Shen Xihe squinted his eyes, and the cold light at the bottom of his eyes disappeared in an instant. She took out a sachet from the wooden box on the dressing table and walked slowly to Lin Qiurong, handing it over with a smile on her face. I have kept my sister.In.Law waiting for a long time, and I hope she will not give up with me. Lin Qiurong glanced at the sachet, which was made of top-quality Sichuan brocade mixed with golden silk crochet, and at first glance, it was quite valuable. Undoubtedly, the Shen family is so extravagant that they make sachets out of brocade. My younger siblings really have a heart for it. As the saying goes, reaching out without hitting the smiling person, Lin Qiurong thought it was Shen Xihe trying to soften her, so she pretended to be reluctant and took the sachet, immediately tying it around her waist with joy. Qiushue lightly tugged at Shen Xihe's sleeve, looking a bit resentful. Madam, why did you give her such a precious sachet when Lin Xihe bullied you so much? In her previous life, she swallowed her anger for her son and didn't want to get along with others. She was kind to the Huo family and even her servants, but in the end, those people only regarded her as a soft persimmon and needed her recklessly. In this life, she had no more scruples in her heart, and revenge became her only purpose in this mansion. She looked at Qiushue and remembered that in the previous life, Qiushue had been beaten to death by the Huo family to protect her. She didn't feel good about it, so she grabbed Qiushue's hand and said coldly, although that thing is good, I'm afraid she won't be able to bear it. Don't worry, from today on, no one in this Marquis' mansion can step on my head again. Chapter 3. Flipping the Face and Growing Backbones. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. On the way to Songhe Hall, Lin Qiurong had been manipulating the sachet with her hands more than once, and it seemed that she really liked it. Yes, this Sichuan brocade is a rare item in the palace. Who wouldn't like it? She was used to snatching some good things from Shen Xihe's hands, and never thought that Shen Xihe would have a problem with the sachet he offered her today. It wasn't until passing by the 100 Flowers garden of the Marquis' mansion that the smile on Lin Qiurong's face gradually turned into fear. A black insect, accompanied by a piercing buzzing sound, suddenly flew towards Lin Qiurong. That thing is somewhat similar to a wasp, but the pain of stinging is 10 times stronger than that of a wasp, and once stung, the wound will quickly swell and become purulent, causing unbearable pain. Help! Help me, what are you still doing? Drive these things away, drive them all away. But the maids around were all frightened, and no one dared to step forward, let alone understand why this evil black bug was only staring at Lin Qiurong's bite. A maid asked in confusion, Madam, have you provoked something? Why do all these things seem to be running towards you alone? But these things seem to be afraid of water. Jump into the pool quickly. Lin Qiurong, who was bitten urgently, could only dive into the pool water with one head. Sure enough, the group of insects no longer chased her and scattered. After Lin Qiurong climbed ashore in a disheveled state, she noticed Shen Xihe, who was always watching with a smile on his face, as if he had thought of something and pulled off his sachet, throwing it aside. Is it you, you slut, who deliberately used this thing to harm me? Shen Xihe smiled and stepped forward to pick up the sachet, but did not provoke any black worms, proving that it was just an ordinary sachet. Lin Qiurong didn't believe it and insisted that there was a problem with the sachet, and even called the local doctor to investigate. After the doctor arrived, he carefully examined the sachet, but found nothing. Lin Qiurong didn't believe it and scolded uncontrollably, it was your collusion. That sachet can provoke poison, so why is it non-toxic? You hired the doctor in sister.In.Law's mansion, why collude with me? Shen Xihe replied innocently. Madam, although I am only a local doctor, I still have medical ethics. Since you cannot trust me, please invite another expert from your local government in the future. The local doctor was impatient and left with a brush of his sleeve after putting down his words. Shen Xihe looked down at Lin Qiurong from a high position, his voice extremely cold and with an irrefutable pressure. Sister-in-law, I used to have some pus, but I can't tolerate you slandering me at will. In the future, I still ask my sister.In.Law to be careful when speaking, so as not to speak with a flickering tongue and suffer from unfounded consequences. The maids around all lowered their heads, perhaps the first time they saw Shen Xihe so angry, their hearts were filled with panic. Lin Qiurong covered her swollen face that looked like a pig's head, staring blankly at Shen Xihe's back. She couldn't believe that Shen Xihe, who had always been obedient, dared to turn against her. While passing by Jinghong courtyard, Shen Xihe saw Huo Yuan, who was only 5 years old, playing with a group of wet nurses. He picked a begonia flower from the tree and smiled happily, "It looks good, give it to your mother." The wet nurse smiled and agreed, "This begonia is so delicate and charming that the crown prince's wife must like it. The young master really has a heart." But unexpectedly, the next second, Yuan Gur, who had just been smiling, reached out his little hand and vigorously slapped the wet nurse's face, roaring, "She's not my mother. She's a shameless slut. She's a prostitute. I don't want her to be my mother, I want my aunt to be my mother." The aunt mentioned by Huo Yuan naturally refers to Lin Qiurong, the young lady who died 6 years ago and has been widowed ever since. Immediately, Huo Yuan forcefully tore apart the crabapple flower and cried hysterically in the yard. At this moment, Shen Xihe stood outside the Jinghong courtyard with his maid and mother.In.Law, quietly witnessing the entire process. Chuxue behind her was stunned and trembled with anger. "Madam, you have only been away from the Marquis' mansion for 3 days. It must be those who chew their tongues that have ruined the young master." Shen Xihe lightly patted Chuxue's shoulder, calm and composed, without any ripples in her eyes. Compared to the heartache of Huo Yuan personally pouring poisoned wine on her in the previous life, these few words that were neither painful nor itchy can hurt her at all. The only thing that made Shen Xihe feel cold and evil was that Huo Yuan should have known from a young age that Lin Qiurong was her biological mother, so the various troubles caused by Huo Yuan in his previous life were probably deliberately troubling her. Sure enough, some people are born bad guys. She withdrew her emotions and said, "Let's go to Songhe Hall first." Songheng. Above the high hall, Huo Laofu was already in his 60s, and his eagle-like eyes were full of shrewdness. Sitting on the left is Lady Song of the Marquis of Zhongyi. When Song saw Shen Xihe, she still had a look of disgust on her face. Although her facial features were fair, no matter how they looked together, they all looked sharp. Madame Huo angrily smashed a teacup at Shen Xihe and said, "Do you still have the face to come back? You haven't returned for 3 days, why don't you die outside? If you are willing to hang yourself with a piece of white silk, I will set up a chastity memorial archway for you. But you, a bitch, have no shame. You swaggered back to the Ho's residence, which is a shame to the Ho's residence." Shen Xihe slightly turned his head and dodged, his teacup shattering all over the ground. The tea soaked her skirt and she frowned slightly. The old lady's words are strange. Isn't it you who made up her mind to send me to the prince's mansion in Jinbei to please Huo Yunxiao? If it weren't for me, a prostitute, then the prince of Jinbei would come to the Marquis' mansion with evidence to settle the matter. I'm afraid the entire Huo family would be imprisoned, right? I can be considered a hero of the Marquis' mansion anyway. This statement is indeed true. If it weren't for Huo Yunxiao exchanging his evidence with Shen Xihe for overnight service in order for her to see the true face of the entire Huo family, otherwise the entire Huo family would have been difficult to escape due to this matter. You. Mrs. Huo was choked for a moment and couldn't speak, her body trembling with anger. The mother.In.Law Song, pointing at Shen Xihe, angrily cursed and said, "You shameless prostitute, you dare to contradict your elders. I will definitely ask yearsHer to take you off." Song thought she would be afraid when she mentioned divorcing her wife, Shen Xihe, but to her surprise, Shen Xihe didn't even blink his eyebrows and said, "Do you want the crown prince to divorce me? Anyway, since this Marquis' mansion can't accommodate me, my wife will pack her things and go back to her mother's house. I wonder if my mother.In.Law can return the key to my warehouse to me." Shen Xihe sincerely reached out his hand and asked Song for the key to the warehouse. Song was stunned. In the past, when she mentioned divorcing her wife, Shen Xihe was like an eggplant beaten by frost, only kneeling on the ground begging for mercy and crying. Now, it seems like she has grown a backbone. As for the warehouse key, Song sure is absolutely unwilling to give it. Over the years, she has controlled Shen Xihe's dowry and has long been squandering it as her own. Now that she has to spit it out, she is unwilling or afraid. If it were discovered that her mother.In.Law had touched her daughter.In.Law's dowry, she was afraid that her spine would be bent if she walked out. In order to hold on to Shen Xihe, the Song family had to repeat their old trick and deliberately poke her heart, saying, "Okay, okay. You can leave as soon as you want, but Brother Yuan must stay. Now his surname is Huo, no matter what, you have no reason to take him away." Shen Xihe squinted slightly, wanting to use Yuan Gu'er to pinch her and force her to swallow her pride, which was a common tactic used by the Song family. She pretended to be wary and followed Song's words, asking, "What do you want to do to Brother Yuan?" Song gave a contemptuous smile and said, "Of course we want to send him to Zhuangzi. Is it possible that you still want us, the Huo family, to raise him like a noble young master? If it weren't for your seductive behavior and captivating yearsHer, how could he insist on keeping you, this thief of life? Even if yearsHer cannot give birth, at most we will adopt another child from our clan, which is better than letting the wild seed you give birth to occupy the title of legitimate son." Shen Xihe felt a chill in his heart. They all knew that Huo Yuan was the product of Lin Qiurong and Huo Qian's incestuous relationship, and was the legitimate bloodline of the Marquis' mansion. However, they deliberately pretended not to know, shamelessly deceiving and threatening her here without blushing or jumping. It was truly shameless. In this lifetime, do you still want to hold on to her? Dreaming. She nodded without any hesitation and said, "I agree to send Brother Yuan to Zhuangzi." In an instant, there was a complete silence inside the Songhe hall. The old lady and Song looked at each other in disbelief, as if they had seen a ghost. Chapter 4. Indeed, that's a bastard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Xihe didn't play cards according to common sense, making it difficult for the Song family to get off. She had already been released and the situation was difficult to recover, but Yuan Gu'er was her only grandson. How could she bear to send him to the manor? Now she can only turn to Madame Huo for help with her gaze. Huo Laofu had doubts in his heart. Although Shen Xihe had a weak and deceitful personality before, why is he so stubborn today? Did you intentionally get angry? She tentatively spoke, "Today my words were a bit heavy, but it was also for the sake of the face of the Huo family." Before the old lady could finish speaking, Shen Xihe threw herself to the ground and said in a voice, "Since I have caused shame to the Marquis' mansion, then I will invite you to come down to the hall and leave with the crown prince. As for Brother Yuan, my mother.In.Law also said, that's a bastard. At first, I didn't want to give birth to him. It was the crown prince who knelt down and begged me to give birth, just for him to have an heir on his face. This child was originally born for the crown prince, but now that he is separated, I can get rid of such a burden." Upon hearing Shen Xihe scold his grandson as a villain, Song couldn't refute it yet. Her eyes widened like copper bells, and she felt extremely suffocated. She could only shout, "Who are you fooling? That's your own flesh and blood. Do you think you can take Brother Yuan away by deliberately saying this? You're dreaming." Song still doesn't believe it, there's no mother who doesn't love her child. Upon hearing this, Shen Xihe deliberately lowered his head and shed tears, feeling extremely sad. I see that this Marquis' mansion is not a place of great value. What kind of gossip has taught Brother Yuan? He even insulted me from behind, saying that my mother who gave birth to her is a prostitute. That's my son. What kind of person has he been taught in this Marquis' mansion? Instead of letting him be raised crooked in this Marquis' mansion, it's better to send him to Zhuangzi to hone his character. Madame Hua and Lady Song exchanged a glance, obviously not expecting Shen Xihe to know that Brother Yuan was secretly cursing her. No wonder Shen Xihe looked as if his heart had turned to ashes. Alright, Brother Yuan is still young. You can teach him well in the future. What kind of discord can you make? Do you really want others to laugh at you? The Crown Prince's love for you is not for you to mess with him. If you still have a conscience, you should think about how to repay the Crown Prince. Madame Hua's shrewd eyes caught Shen Xihe's unusual expression. She was really afraid that she would force Shen Xihe to make a fuss and leave, so she quickly tried to reconcile. Shen Xihe's lips curved into a faint smile. Sure enough, the Hua family will not easily give up on her money tree. They are skilled at using mental suppression to constantly belittle her until she denies herself, loses herself, and is completely controlled by them. They can compromise for their own interests, but Shen Xihe will not easily miss this opportunity for revenge. Yuan Gur has been taught like this. As a concubine, I sincerely want to send him to my estate to hone his skills. Coincidentally, Mr. De Huai is also living in that elegant residence, so he can definitely help me discipline Yuan Gur well. Upon hearing this, Madame Hua was startled and spoke urgently. Do you know that Mr. De Huai has been demoted by the official family and will never be hired? If you let such a person raise Brother Yuan, it will ruin his future career. Shen Xihe replied indifferently, I know that Brother Yuan is not worthy of the status of the legitimate son of this Marquis' mansion, and I don't expect his career. I just hope he can cultivate his character and live a down-to-earth life. And Mr. De Huai's character was too upright, which caused the officials' displeasure and led to his demotion. Only such a person could teach the crooked Yuan Gur well. Let's settle this matter like this. I will send Brother Yuan to the villa another day, and he will not obstruct the old lady's eyes again. Without waiting for the old lady to refute, Shen Xihe bent down to bow and leave, as if he had not seen the ironclad faces of the two people inside the room. After coming out of the Songhe Hall, Shen Xihe couldn't help but stop walking as he passed by the Chongjing Pavilion. Memories flashed through her mind, causing a piercing pain. In her previous life, she was here to break through the affair between Huo Qian and Lin Qirong. The Chongjing Pavilion is Huo Qian's study, and he always uses the excuse of focusing on reading to never let Shen Xihe approach. If it weren't for that day, her kite would have fallen into the Chongjing Pavilion, and she would have witnessed that disgusting scene with her own eyes. I'm afraid she wouldn't have known that there was a secret passage in the Chongjing Pavilion that connected directly to Lin Qirong's Jinxiu garden. Every night when Huo Qian works hard and studies hard, it is a time for them to indulge in unbridled promiscuity here. So the two people who seem to have no intersection use this method to have an affair under her nose, making her blind and unaware. Shen Xihe quietly entered the Chongjing Pavilion through the small door on the side. Chu Xue, who was following her, gently tugged at the corner of her clothes and stopped her, saying, Madam, this is the Crown Prince's study. Shen Xihe didn't explain, only made a hissing gesture and quietly touched the window of the study. Although the window is tightly closed, it cannot block the sound that can make people blush from inside. Chu Xue covered her mouth and widened her eyes in surprise, while Shen Xihe listened to the conversation inside with an indifferent expression. Inside, Lin Qirong leaned against Huo Qian half-naked and coquettishly said, "An Lang, that scumbag Shen Xihe has caused me so much trouble. You have to vent your anger for me." Huo Qian wrapped his head around Lin Qirong's waist, sniffed lightly on her chest, and coaxed, "All right Ronger, don't be angry. I will definitely find a way to punish that slut in the future." In the future. You just perfunctory me. Lin Qiurong gave him a light push. Huo Qian hugged the person in his arms tighter and patiently explained, now is not the time. The Huo family is not as prosperous as before. As long as we keep Shen Xihe, that despicable person, the Shen family will naturally contribute money and effort to the Marquis' mansion, so that we can have a good life, right? Lin Qiurong pouted angrily and said, I thought that slut's reputation was ruined this time. She should have picked up her tail to be a good person, but why is she still so stubborn? Isn't it that the Prince of Zhenbei really interested in her? She won't take us seriously if she has a backing. Huo Qian kissed Lin Qiurong's lips and sneered, don't worry, Shen Xihe is just a broken shoe. Huo Yunxiao insisted on forcing her, but it was just for revenge that I stole his engagement back then. Speaking of which, Huo Yunxiao has also been a great help to me. Now that despicable person must feel ashamed of me, and everything will go according to my wishes. With the degree of love that the Shen family has for that despicable person, the Shen family will eventually be in our pockets. Upon hearing this, Chushua's body trembled with anger, completely overturning the perfect image of the Crown Prince in her heart. She always thought that the Crown Prince had a deep affection for her young lady, unwavering until death. Even if the young lady lost her innocence, he could not care. Unexpectedly, all of this was just a facade. The Crown Prince secretly colluded with his sister.In.Law and even planned to use her young lady. Miss, why didn't you just expose this dog man and woman? Shen Xihe looked at the sky with a cold smile and said, what if we expose it? Even if we go our separate ways, he won't receive any punishment. Instead, he will bite back at me, saying that I lost my virginity first. This way, the saliva of the entire capital can drown me, and his scandal will soon be covered up. Chushua asked unwillingly, is it difficult to achieve such a cheap couple? Are you really going to endure it for a lifetime? Shen Xihe shook his head and said, if you want it to die, you must first make it crazy. They will think that I am a prey that cannot escape from the palm of their hand, but they will not think that I am the hunter hidden in the dark. And only I can laugh until the end. After returning to Elan Academy, Shen Xihe locked himself up in the Buddhist temple. She lit a stick of incense and paid homage to her mother's tablet. Auntie, my daughter once promised you that she would live a mediocre and stable life, but now I will break my promise. Avoidance cannot solve problems, and a person's biggest mistake is weakness. I must become stronger to protect my child, mother. You will surely understand my difficulties. Shen Xihe wiped away her tears and her eyes became even more determined. Then she took out a jade token from her sleeve and handed it to Chushua. Take this token and go to Fengyan Pavilion to find the pavilion master, and recall all the subordinates who were dismissed by my mother back to Bianjing. I will make this loyalty Marquis' mansion a hell on earth. Chapter 5. Acting, who wouldn't know? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just after dinner, the maid Chuntao lifted the curtain and carried a can of ginseng soup into the inner room. Madam, these past few days have been hard work. The Crown Prince has specially instructed the kitchen to make ginseng soup for you. Please drink it while it's hot. Chuntao took the ginseng soup from the jar and poured it into a porcelain white bowl, but the jade bracelet on her wrist was particularly prominent. Shen Xihe's gaze towards Chuntao suddenly became slightly cold. The quality of this bracelet is excellent, it is definitely not something that a maid like Chuntao should have. It seems that Chuntao's betrayal occurred even earlier than she had imagined, and she was already bribed as soon as she entered the Marquis' mansion. In her previous life, she saw Chuntao selling herself to bury her father and pitifully buying her. She thought she would repay her kindness, but she didn't expect to have engaged in the business of seeking glory as a seller early on, acting as Huo Qian's surveillance eye by her side. Chuntao panicked and hid her hand behind her. Shen Xihe seemed to have not seen her small movements and only gave her a faint command, just now, the doctor from the mansion came to see and said that my spleen is hot and I cannot drink anything that can greatly nourish it. This is a reward for you. Madam, where can we go? It was specially ordered by the Crown Prince to be made for you by the dining room. Besides, there are precious medicinal herbs such as ginseng and deer antler inside. I am a lowly servant, and I am not worthy of enjoying such good things. Chuantao's face stiffened and she instinctively retorted. Just by smelling this flavor, Shen Xihe knew that it was not any ginseng soup at all, but a juezi soup with enough safflower added, specially using precious medicinal materials such as ginseng and deer antler to mask its odor. Shen Xihe clenched his palm tightly, feeling a chill that could not be stopped. Huo Qian is truly a beast even more venomous than a venomous snake. He was afraid that he would serve Huo Yunxiao for 3 days and become the legitimate son of the Marquis' mansion. Therefore, he gave himself the medicine of the last son, so that he could only support Huo Yuan for his entire life and be held in his hands for a lifetime. It's all thanks to the Crown Prince's wishes. Madam, why don't you drink while it's hot? Chuntao handed over the soup bowl again. Unexpectedly, the next second Shen Xihe suddenly flipped his face and said, I said I won't drink. Why, since I have only been away from the mansion for 3 days, don't you take me, the Crown Prince's wife, seriously? Chuntao quickly knelt down and said, You are the master of the maidservant, and I naturally want to listen to you. In the past, Shen Xihe used to be gentle and polite to servants, which made her never take anything she said seriously. But now when she gets angry, she really scares Chuntao. Shen Xihe snatched the soup bowl and gave Chuxue a glance, forcing her to kneel down on Chuntao tightly. Then, he opened Chuantao's mouth and poured the bowl of thick soup with added ingredients into her mouth. Even though Chuntao struggled fiercely, Shen Xihe still didn't let go of her thoughts. In her previous life, she was just too kind to end up like that. Chuntao naturally knew what was mixed in the ginseng soup. After being forced to drink more than half of it, she gritted her throat in fear and tried to spit out all the ginseng soup she had consumed. Since Madam rewarded you, that's grace. How dare you vomit? Chuxue pinched her chin and forced her to swallow it back. Shen Xihe walked up to Chuntao and asked coldly, What are you afraid of? It's just some ginseng soup. Why do you feel like you've been drinking poison that penetrates your intestines? Is it difficult? Do you look down on my wife's reward? Chuantao's face turned pale. Just as she didn't know how to answer, the pearl curtain shook and someone entered the room again. As soon as Huo Qian entered the inner room, he scanned the disheveled spring peach with his spare light and quickly walked towards Shen Xihe. He approached and lightly grabbed Shen Xihe's shoulder, hugging him in his arms, coaxing him, What's wrong with this? What's wrong with being a good servant? If you get angry and break your body, I will feel sorry for you. Shen Xihe's body trembled slightly, and when she heard these hypocritical words, she felt extremely nauseous and uncomfortable all over. Huo Qian is someone who knows how to act, and Shen Xihe knows in her heart that if she wants to fight such a person, she must also learn from the Southern Opera troupe and sing a great play against him. Her eyes drooped, with tears in them, and she said sadly, Husband, my body is now notorious, and I am being looked down upon everywhere. I no longer have the face to stay in the Marquis' mansion. Husband, why don't you separate from my body and let me go out of the mansion? As for Brother Yuan, I have already arranged for him and will send him to the manor in the suburbs of Beijing the day after tomorrow. After much thought, I still felt that my mother.In.law was right. After all, Brother Yuan is not from the Marquis' family, and it is only proper for you, husband, to adopt a child to your knees in the clan. Huo Qian hugged Shen Xihe tightly, his chin pressed against her neck, and with a blink of an eye, he saw red plums blooming on her slender and fair neck. Although Shen Xihe turned his back to him, he could still see through the copper mirror that his eyes were full of malice as he stared straight at his neck. Xihe, don't leave me. No matter how others perceive me, I don't care. I won't leave you behind. As long as Brother Yuan is born to you, he will be my son, the legitimate young master of the Marquis' mansion. How could I go to the clan to adopt another child? Huo Qian is really good at seducing women's hearts. If she were still the ignorant Shen Xihe from the previous life, she would be moved to the point of being speechless and willing to give everything for this man. Unfortunately, she is no longer the same person as before. Shen Xihe lay in Huo Qian's arms, tears pouring down his face. Huo Qian coaxed him for a while before stopping. About half an hour later, Xia Tao received Huo Qian's order and brought in another bowl of soup and medicine when she entered the room. "What's this?" Shen Xihe looked at the soup bowl and frowned. Xia Tao knelt down and said, "Madam, the spleen is hot and the fire is rising. This is a decoction for clearing heat and detoxifying." Huo Yunxiao picked up a soup bowl and scooped a spoonful to Shen Xihe's mouth, coaxing him, "Drinking while it's hot is good for your health." Shen Xihe cursed inwardly, "Huo Yunxiao, this bastard, must see her drink this Juezi Tang with his own eyes today before he can give up. Is it really difficult to avoid?" Shen Xihe pushed him away, tears swirling in his eyes, feeling extremely aggrieved and saying, "Is this avoidance soup? Do you suspect that I have a relationship with Huo Yunxiao and insist that I drink this soup?" She seemed to be impatient and even threw her fist at Huo Qian, crying out, "I once said that even if Huo Yunxiao kidnapped me, I would rather die than surrender. Huo Yunxiao, he didn't touch me." Huo Qian was half believing and half skeptical. He believed he had complete control over Shen Xihe and did not believe that she would lie in front of him. But what is suspicious is that there are indeed traces of ambiguity left between Shen Xihe's slender neck. Shen Xihe knew what Huo Qian was thinking, so she touched the red mark on her neck and spoke with great shame, "He originally wanted to be strong with me, but I only have a husband in my heart, so I would rather die than comply. After I tried to kill myself a few times, Huo Yunxiao lost interest in me. My husband should understand that he forcibly abducted me, not because he had any interest in me as a woman, but because he wanted to embarrass him in front of the world. Later, Huo Yunxiao had me locked up in the firewood room for 3 days. There were many insects and ants in that place, and my skin was delicate. If bitten, it would cause a rash. Husband, look." Shen Xihe then put the red mark on his neck and took the initiative to approach Huo Qian for him to review. Sure enough, beneath the red mark, there seemed to be an abscess with a bulging sac. Seeing Huo Qian seeming to waver, Shen Xihe wiped away tears and poured out a heartache, "Since I am able to return to the mansion alive, I am naturally clean and innocent. I have never done anything wrong to my husband, but he still refuses to believe me. So what is the point of living for me? It's better to just die." Huo Qian is a bit embarrassed. If Shen Xihe had to take this medicine today, he wouldn't believe her. But if he just let it go, he would feel a bit uneasy. Seeing Shen Xihe really going to hit the wall, Huo Qian finally believed her and pulled her back. He held her in his arms and apologized, "Xihe, I really have no other intention. I don't believe you either. I'm just afraid you might be bullied and I want to cure you of any future troubles. Since Huo Yunxiao didn't touch you, there's no need to drink the decoction to avoid hurting your body." Shen Xihe obediently nodded, revealing a cold smile from an angle that Huo Qian couldn't see. Who wouldn't know how to act? Chapter 6. Heartless, Mother's Heart Like Iron. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Huo Qian seems to have no intention of leaving yet. After drinking a cup of tea, he casually asked, "By the way, did you have a prescription for treating the epidemic that you asked someone to find before?" Shen Xihe had long known that this was the true purpose for Huo Qian to come and find her today. In the past life, when the status of the Huo family was precarious, it was Huo Yunxiao who took the medicine for treating the epidemic from her and presented it to the emperor for great achievements. However, this credit was falsely claimed by Lin Qiurong, and she was granted a decree as a result, feeling proud for a while. And in this life, she won't let anyone take what belongs to her for nothing. "Husband, I'm afraid I can't give you this prescription," Shen Xihe hesitated and said. Huo Qian became anxious and quickly asked, "What's wrong? Is there a problem with the prescription?" Shen Xihe still had a puzzled expression on his face, his worried gaze falling on the wooden box on the dressing table. It's not that the prescription is bad, it's because this prescription can't be passed on. Hey, husband, you still don't ask, he said. Anyway, let's not get involved in this epidemic. Huo Yunxiao seemed witty and didn't mention it, but his gaze kept searching the room. He knew that the Shen family had a close relationship with a divine doctor, and the doctor's prescription was never bad, so he would never miss this opportunity to make contributions. Shen Xihe found an excuse to take a shower and left, deliberately creating an opportunity for Huo Yunxiao. Sure enough, when she returned, she saw Huo Yunxiao's uncontrollable upturned lips, which must have been successful. The goal was achieved, and he prepared to leave under the pretext of official business. As soon as he stepped out, he seemed to remember something and turned around to ask, "What's wrong with my sister.In-Law's sachet today? I see she's quite injured." Shen Xihe sneered in his heart. Did he start questioning after achieving his goal? Why did my husband come back to the mansion not to see me first, but to see my sister.In-Law first? I really don't know who is more important in my husband's heart. Shen Xihe pretended to be jealous and turned against Huo Yunxiao's army. Isn't this on the way? By the way, Mingming Jinxiu Yuan and Ilan Yuan are one in the east and the other in the west. Such a clumsy lie, Huo Yunxiao is really deceiving her like a fool. My husband asked me these questions, but I don't believe my sister.In-Law's words, thinking that the trouble she suffered today was caused by me, right? If I really had that ability, I would have used it to deal with Huo Yunxiao long ago, and I wouldn't have. Huo Yunxiao quietly observed Shen Xihe. Today, everyone said that Shen Xihe was different from before, but he felt that this woman was not as exaggerated as others had said. She was still the fool who was coaxed by him to score points in all directions. Of course I believe you, but your sister.In-Law has been a widow for many years and is lonely in the deep house. It's inevitable that she has a bad temper. Please bear with her and don't argue with her. Shen Xihe pursed her lips and didn't say anything, feeling lonely in her boudoir. Even though you have been sleeping together night and night. She leaned against the door with a reluctant expression as she watched Huo Yunxiao leave, until the other person's back completely disappeared into the darkness, and her expression finally cooled down. Shen Xihe quickly walked to the dressing table, opened the wooden box, and the prescription inside disappeared without a trace. Yue became anxious and said, "Madam, you know the Crown Prince has an idea for a prescription. How could you still let him steal it?" Shen Xihe remained calm and composed. "Don't worry, my things are not so easy to steal." Seeing Shen Xihe's confident demeanor again, Yue thought of the sachet that had ruined Lin's life today. Therefore, she asked, "Madam, what's wrong with that sachet today? It really made Lin's mouth shut. In fact, that medicinal powder is non-toxic, but it cannot be mixed with gardenia flowers, otherwise it will attract black insects. And Lin Qiurong's favorite is the hair oil made from gardenia flowers. It's difficult not to attract black insects, let alone she jumped into the lake to avoid them. The sachet was soaked in water, and the medicine powder hidden inside was naturally washed away by the water. No one could notice the secret behind it." Just as she was about to go to bed, Shen Xihe's mind came back to the scene of her intimate contact with Huo Yunxiao just now. She was instantly on pins and needles, feeling very dirty. She asked Yue to prepare hot water and wash it back and forth for an hour. Sure enough, cheap men are very dirty. The next morning, Shen Xihe had just sat at the table eating when someone from Madame Huo's side came to deliver a message. Originally, Brother Yuan suddenly fell ill, and even the local doctor couldn't diagnose the illness, which was very difficult. Shen Xihe was asked to go and have a look. Shen Xihe immediately withdrew his unused breakfast and headed towards the Honghu courtyard with an anxious expression on his face. Although she already knew that Yuan Gu'er was not her child, in order to avoid revealing any clues, she still pretended to be her usual kind mother. As soon as Shen Xihe entered Yuan Gu'er's room, she saw Yuan Gu'er, with a sickly face, lying pitifully on the bed. Her exposed arms were covered in dense red rashes, which made people worried and scared just by looking at them. The nurse nervously stood aside and explained, "I don't know why this young master suddenly fell ill. He was still fine yesterday." Shen Xihe did not scold the wet nurse. As soon as she approached the bed, a smell of white peach immediately hit her face, and she immediately understood what was going on. The subtle taste may be imperceptible to others, but Shen Xihe is extremely sensitive to the smell. There was a ripple in her eyes, and the black-hearted old lady of the Songhe Hall actually came up with the trick of using bitter meat. "I'm afraid it was she who threatened to send Brother Yuan to the village yesterday, and these old witch women are anxious. Madame Hua and Madame Ho, both of whom seem to dislike Brother Yuan on the surface, have privately caused him excruciating pain. How could they not know that Brother Yuan is allergic to white peach? They believe that the child would be Shen Xihe's weakness, and that without a mother, they would not hurt their own son. They thought that if Yuan Gu'er was sick, she would be reluctant to send the child away." Shen Xihe's eyes were slightly cold, but unfortunately, Huo Yuan was not her own son, so she didn't want to feel heartbroken. At the bedside, Yuan Gu'er looked up at Shen Xihe with a flushed face and an apologetic expression, tears of grievance welling up immediately. He held Shen Xihe's hand and cried, "Mother, it was yearsHer who was wrong. It was yearsHer who made you sad. Don't miss yearsHer. Mother, you drove yearsHer away. yearsHer doesn't want to go to the manor. yearsHer only wants to be with her mother. Please feel sorry for her and let yearsHer stay in the mansion with you." Ah, this Huo Yuangue is really Huo Qian's biological son, inheriting his father's legacy. His acting skills are really good. If it were usual, Shen Xihe would only feel heartbroken when he saw Yuan Gu'er like this, and would agree to all the demands made by Yuan Gu'er. But now it's different from before. She knows very well that she's facing a white-eyed wolf that's not well fed. Today, we must show him what it means to have a heart as strong as iron. Shen Xihe pretended to wipe away her tears, covered her indifferent face with a handkerchief, and choked up, saying, "Mother's silly yearsHer, how could I not want yearsHer?" Chapter 7. Greetings, you are the one. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's just that this Marquis' mansion is deep and intimidating. My mother is afraid that you will be influenced by those idle words and lose your mind. In short, Zhuangzi, you must go. Mr. Dehuai is very good. With him teaching you enlightenment, my mother can rest assured. Later, Shen Xihe wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and turned his red eyes to the old lady, saying, "Brother Yuan is allergic to white peaches. Just take some heat-clearing and detoxifying formulas. It's not a big problem, don't bother the old lady." Shen Xihe's attitude made Madame Hua a bit dumbfounded. In the past, Brother Yuan had a headache, but Shen Xihe seemed to be protecting his eyes. Why did he suddenly become so ruthless? She could only insincerely advise, although I don't like Brother Yuan, he is still the legitimate son under the name of the Crown Prince. It would be too late to rush to the estate like this, as it would provoke gossip. Shen Xihe shrugged and said, "Zhuangzi is already more suitable for recuperation. If Brother Yuan goes, he will definitely recover faster." Seeing Shen Xihe so indifferent, the old lady became a bit anxious and said, "You are too ruthless as a mother. I can't bear to watch anymore." Shen Xihe remained unmoved and said, "My kind mother often defeats her son. I am now being stricter with Brother Yuan, just for his good." No matter how much Yuan Gu'er cried, Shen Xihe always looked extremely heartbroken, but forced by helplessness, he was determined not to take Yuan Gu'er away. The old lady was completely helpless, feeling suffocated and unable to vent her anger. She could only groan and return to the Songhe Hall. After coming out of the Honghu courtyard, Shen Xihe wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes. His gaze was indifferent, without any hint of injury, completely different from the anxious expression on his face that had just arrived in a hurry. Once Yuan Gu'er was her lifeline, but now whose lifeline is it? This Shuangzi, brother Yuan has gone to settle. Just after noon, someone couldn't hold back. Lin Qiurong arrived faster than Shen Xihe had imagined, indicating that she really cared about brother Yuan. Why hasn't your master come out yet? After drinking 3 cups, Lin Qiurong finally couldn't wait anymore. She grabbed Xiue, who was adding tea to her, and asked urgently. The crown prince's wife was just taking a nap and is currently dressing up. Xiue walked back with a teapot in her hand, without much interaction with Lin Qiurong. Anyway, it was just intentionally hanging her out. After about another stick of incense, Shen Xihe walked out surrounded by the maids. It really started with countless calls, my younger siblings' heirs are really big. Lin Qiurong couldn't help but speak with a strange tone. Shen Xihe ignored her and asked in a low voice, I don't know why sister.In.Law is here. What's the point? Lin Qiurong raised her eyebrows slightly and said, I haven't seen my younger siblings come to my house to greet me these days. I'm worried that my younger siblings may be feeling unwell, so I came over to take a look. Shen Xihe's face darkened slightly as she remembered the words that Huo Qian used to say to her in her previous life. Xihe, your sister.In.Law is like a mother. You must be respectful everywhere and serve her day by day. In his previous life, Huo Qian always used his sister.In.Law as an excuse to make her respect Lin Qiurong everywhere, and even went to her house every day to offer tea. She thought this was the rule of the Marquis family, but it wasn't until her death that she realized that Huo Qian's daily request for her to offer tea to Lin Qiurong was actually an invisible demotion of her to a concubine and to offer tea to her mistress. This dog man and woman are really disgusting. Her eyes were cold, her lips curled, and she joked, please be well. You're the one. If I pay respects to my elders, even if I drag my sick body forward, I have no shirking my responsibility. But sister.In.Law, we are both of the same generation and do not serve a husband. What kind of family should I pay respects to you? What I know is that my sister.In.Law is like a mother, and those who don't think I respect her are the illegitimate mother of the crown prince. Even if it's my illegitimate mother, I, as the wife of the crown prince and the future marquis's wife, shouldn't bow down to a concubine, should I? Shen Xihe. Don't talk nonsense, my father.In.Law and I are innocent. Lin Qiurong stood up and pointed at Shen Xihe angrily, unable to speak. Lin Qiurong couldn't believe it. Shen Xihe, who used to see her, mice, and cats, dared to speak to her like this. Shen Xihe looked at her jokingly and said, Sister-in-law, why are you in a hurry? I'm just giving you an example, I'm just rushing to talk. Why are you still in a hurry? Lin Qiurong's face turned red with anger and she said, Shen Xihe, there are some things you can't say with your mouth open. Do you also know that there are some things that cannot be spoken out loud? It's not easy to be choreographed, right? She approached Lin Qiurong step by step and questioned loudly, I don't know, it hurts if the knife doesn't hit me. But sister.In.Law, why do you have to stab me in the heart? As soon as the momentum came over, Lin Qiurong seemed to have become shorter, and she instinctively withdrew her body. Shen Xihe continued to question, I know it's you who orchestrated me behind my back. It's you who taught brother Yuan to make him a 5-year-old child and call his own mother a prostitute. Aren't you poking a knife into my heart? I didn't. Lin Qiurong never expected that Shen Xihe would confront her in such a way. She felt extremely guilty and fell into a chair with a weak leg. Shen Xihe gave her a sidelong glance and said, I know you don't like me, the daughter of a merchant, and you also have objections to Yuan Guer's background. I should have hated you, but the crown prince respects your sister.In.Law. I have no choice but to follow her wishes and send Yuan Guer to a place you can't see, no longer obstructing your eyes. I just hope that she will take care of herself in the future and don't make things difficult for me. Upon hearing that Shen Xihe was going to send brother Yuan to the manor, Lin Qiurong couldn't calm down and blurted out the truth in her heart. How could you send brother Yuan away? Where is that manor? Can you compare it to the Marquis' mansion? You're going to destroy brother Yuan. Shen Xihe looked at her suspiciously and said, is sister.In.Law even more anxious than me, who is a mother? Lin Qiurong choked on the spot. She was anxiously following the ants on the hot pot, afraid that she might have driven Shen Xihe crazy, so she insisted on sending Yuan Gur away. If that's the case, wouldn't it be like lifting a stone and hitting your own foot? So, Lin Qiurong forced out an embarrassed smile and said, what I mean is, brother Yuan is still a child, no matter what, I won't argue with the same child. Shen Xihe stood up and stared straight at Lin Qiurong, saying, but I'm an accountant. I'm afraid if I keep brother Yuan in the mansion again, I'll be misled by my sister.In.Law and not know my own mother in the future. Looking at Lin Qiurong's violently undulating chest and the anxious expression between her eyebrows, Shen Xihe felt very happy in her heart. In her previous life, she was also under such a threat and had to swallow her pride. Now she must let Lin Qiurong taste what it feels like to have her son held in someone else's hand. Chapter 8. Fame, Worth Geometry. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This translator is experiencing an error, please try another translator. Chapter 9. Be good and call my husband. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Xihe had just bid farewell to Xiaoyin when he ran into a drunken man shortly after taking a few steps. The man exuded a strong alcoholic aura and his mind was in chaos. Just being hit by Shen Xihe, he stumbled and fell backwards. Sorry, Shen Xihe apologized slightly before wanting to leave. Unexpectedly, the man acted recklessly and grabbed Shen Xihe's ankle, laughing foolishly and saying, where is the beauty running? You bumped into me, why don't you compensate me properly? Come and have a drink with me. The servant who was leading the way on the side was extremely anxious. Sir, this is not the girl from our Fengyan pavilion. How about I call a new girl to accompany you? Unexpectedly, the man suddenly flipped his face, kicked the servant away, and even spat. Pointing at Shen Xihe and shouting loudly, what kind of joke are you talking about? What else can a woman in the Fengyan pavilion be if she's not a prostitute? Why, you look down on me like that slut like peony, thinking I can't sleep, right? Humph, my master wants her to accompany him today. The man pulled off a jade pendant from his waist and smashed it onto Shen Xihe's body. Shen Xihe frowned and ignored the jade pendant, letting it fall to the ground. She turned around and wanted to leave, not wanting to cause trouble. The man behind him relentlessly grabbed Shen Xihe while she was not paying attention, and pulled off her curtain cap. Damn it, I'm going to see what kind of bitch you are today. Dare to challenge my face. Soon, the commotion here caught the attention of others. On the opposite railing, with a golden crown on his head and a fan in his hand, the man tugged at Huo Qian beside him and said, look, isn't that woman a bit familiar? Huo Qian joked and agreed, it seems that the prince is a regular here, and any girl looks familiar to him. Huo Qian's words are somewhat ironic. He claims to be noble and never comes to this kind of brothel to seek pleasure with prostitutes. If it weren't for today's encounter with King Yong after entering the palace and being forcibly dragged here, he wouldn't have come to this Fengyan pavilion for half a step. King Yong is not a fool, so he couldn't hear the sarcasm here. He gently shook his fan and joked, that woman looks like Inshitzi's wife no matter how she looks. TSK, no wonder she looks so familiar. Huo Qian originally thought that King Yong deliberately humiliated him, but when he looked up and followed the direction pointed by the folding fan in King Yong's hand, he actually saw that the woman in white on the opposite side was very similar to Shen Xihe. Even from a distance, looking at that back alone is like a 10 by 10 figure. Several young masters of noble families also burst into laughter in an instant, and someone deliberately joked, Princeton, I didn't know you had this habit of giving up your wife. First, you gave up to the Prince of Zhenbei, and then... Shut up. Huo Qian's face suddenly turned cold. My wife is clearly at home, how could she be in such a dirty place? Don't talk nonsense. Huo Qian actually doesn't care about Shen Xihe, he only cares about his face. What's Prince N's hurry? We're just joking a few words. You're such a generous person, shouldn't you care? After all, the king of Zhenbei robbed your wife, and you dare not even fart. Ha ha ha. Amidst the laughter of the crowd, Huo Qian's fists couldn't stop trembling lightly. At this moment, he really hates Shen Xihe. He cursed softly, it's all because of Shen Xihe, that slut, who caused me to lose face. At this moment, Shen Xihe felt a sinister gaze from behind, and a chill rushed into her back, making her shudder. She tilted her head slightly, and in the afterglow, she caught a glimpse of an incredible face. How could Huo Qian be here? What a thief! I met someone who cut off the road. By chance. No matter how good her psychological resilience is, she is also anxious. She immediately pulled the curtain cap from the drunken man's hand, but was still tightly grabbed by the man and refused to let go. Let go. Shen Xihe became anxious and saw Huo Qian walking towards her with a calm face. She couldn't imagine how she would explain everything if Huo Qian caught her. Just as she was flustered, the man who had been clinging to him had already quietly lay on the ground, like a dead dog. A thick and warm big hand tightly grasped her small hand, which was as cold as ice. Before she could lift her gaze, the big hand exerted force and pulled her to the corner, avoiding the opposite view. My curtain hat. Shoo, don't turn back. And she also fell into a warm embrace. It was the familiar Su Muxiang. As soon as she looked up, she met a pair of deep eyes. Yunxiao, why are you here? Shen Xihe was slightly surprised. She remembered that Huo Yunxiao clearly disliked coming to this land of fireworks and willows the most. Huo Yunxiao glanced at her and snorted softly, it's my turn to ask you these words. Why are you here? Shen Xihe didn't know how to explain, turned around and wanted to run, but was grabbed by Huo Yunxiao's waist with one hand and pressed tightly in his arms, unable to move. Huo Yunxiao pressed her tightly against the wall, and her thin lips, which had a slight alcohol smell, suddenly approached. The distance between the two was too ambiguous. Shen Xihe raised her eyes slightly. Huo Yunxiao's face was so seductive that she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. The dull heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and Shen Xihe didn't know who it belonged to. She only knew that her cheeks were burning, but she still comforted herself because she was too nervous. Want to run? Do you think you can run away? Huo Qian has an eye on you. If you ask me, I will help you. Huo Yunxiao's voice is deep and extremely magnetic, with a lazy tone full of seduction. Shen Xihe only felt an itch in his neck, and his soul seemed to be hooked away by the man in front of him. Subconsciously, he nodded. She coquettishly said, please help me. Huo Yunxiao's breathing suddenly became heavier, and a blush appeared between his earlobes. He deliberately mischievously said, who am I? Huo Yunxiao. Huo Yunxiao is not satisfied with this answer. Shen Xihe continued to reply, Prince of Zhenbei. Huo Yunxiao lifted her delicate chin with his hands. Be good, call my husband. Shen Xihe blushed instantly and stuttered, there are so many people here, isn't it good? Huo Yunxiao teased her ear hair and casually asked, who said that I took over her body, that's her husband. Recalling her actions on the carriage that day, she was so ashamed that she really wanted to find a crack in the ground to get in. The tightly closed door was suddenly pushed open. Yunxiao, I came to drink with you. Why did you leave me alone? Ah. This is. Ah. What's the matter? Has the old iron tree blossomed? Do you know how to tease girls? You, TSK, oh. Didn't you agree to come here and only drink alcohol, not pick flowers? Are you scaring me? The man with a drunken expression walked out and saw a girl under Huo Yunxiao's body in a hazy way. He was startled and instantly regained consciousness. He had an incredulous expression on his face, and his speech was a bit awkward. Huo Yunxiao smiled faintly and said, "Playing with wild cats in my free time makes my heart itch." The man curiously put his face to the past and said, "Let me see what kind of beauty you are, the little wild cat who lost his soul and hooked you up with an old iron tree." Huo Yunxiao tugged at the corner of his mouth and cursed at him, "Go aside, my wild cat, do you also deserve to watch?" At this moment, Shen Xihe, who was trembling, felt a chill on his lips. She opened her eyes wide, trembling all over her body. Unexpectedly, Huo Yunxiao dared to kiss her in public. Chapter 10. Indulging in Love, Interweaving Forms and Shadows. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Xihe, who was overwhelmed by the kiss, had completely forgotten that there was still Huo Qian chasing after him relentlessly. Her body floated lightly, as if returning to the carriage of that day, feeling the pleasure of penetrating deep into the clouds. The door was gently knocked open, and the two people entwined quickly entered the room. With a hook of Huo Yunxiao's long leg, the door was tightly closed. Passing through layers of gauze and entering the inner room, the bed curtain made of thin gauze was slowly lowered, and through the dim candlelight, the intertwined bodies of the two were faintly visible. The belt loosened and the clothes half faded. A pair of jade-like legs hooked around the man's sturdy waist. With only a hint of coolness left on his chest, Shen Xihe quickly leaned his hand against the man's chest. "I can't." She shook her head and pointed towards the door. At this moment, she really can't relax her body to do that kind of thing. There was a loud noise outside the door, with curses and apologies from others. Obviously, it was Huo Qian who came knocking on the door. Bang bang. The door was smashed. Shen Xihe's body visibly trembled lightly. Huo Yunxiao lightly wiped her lips with his fingers and smiled, "Why, are you afraid?" Afraid of being caught and raped by her husband himself in bed. His narrow eyes scanned Shen Xihe's face back and forth, as if searching for clues. Shen Xihe wanted to push Huo Yunxiao away to grab his clothes. But Huo Yunxiao didn't give her a chance at all and confined her even tighter in his arms. He laughed wickedly and said, "When I kissed you just now, why didn't you push me away? You can clearly refuse me." "Don't make a fuss," Shen Xihe lightly pushed him again. The next second, the light in Huo Yunxiao's eyes disappeared, and his eyes were filled with gloom. He spoke coldly, "Paranoid and crazy, so what you said on the carriage before was all a lie to me, right? You still have that man in your heart, you're afraid he'll see you and I have sex." "No." Shen Xihe was anxious and forgot that Huo Yunxiao was paranoid and sensitive. "Since it's not, what are you afraid of? If he finds out, he will definitely dismiss you, and I can rightfully snatch you back." Pop. Shen Xihe slapped Huo Yunxiao's face. "Do you think I'm something? You can snatch it around and grab it." I didn't expect this slap to completely excite Huo Yunxiao. He tightly pressed Shen Xihe's head and gave him a delicate kiss without giving him any chance to catch his breath. Bang! The door was kicked open. Huo Qian walked in with a calm face. Through layers of veil, he could only vaguely see two figures intertwined together. He had intended to get closer and take a closer look, but just as his hand was about to touch the last layer of veil, the man on the bed suddenly let out a low chuckle, "Get out." Huo Qian's pupils suddenly widened. That's the voice of King Huo Yunxiao of Zhenbei. How could Huo Yunxiao be here? Can Huo Yunxiao and Shen Xihe, these despicable people, arrange to have an affair here to cover up? No, Shen Xihe clearly loves him to the bone and will not betray him. But his hand still didn't listen and wanted to lift the last layer of veil. Huo Yunxiao refused to give him a chance and kicked the stool in front of the bed, smashing Huo Qian out alive. His voice was extremely cold, "Bastard, at least I am also your third uncle. As a junior, how dare you spy on the affairs in the elder's room here?" Huo Qian got up from the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. He licked the bloodstain on the corner of his lips and sneered, I wonder who the woman on Uncle San's bed is. Dare she reveal the true face of Mount Lu? At this moment, Shen Xihe, who was huddled in Huo Yunxiao's arms like a quail, trembled tightly all over. What's wrong with you? Get lost. Huo Yunxiao's voice became even colder. Huo Qian persisted in questioning, a prostitute, what's there to hide from third uncle? Is there any hidden secret in it? Then he pointed at Shen Xihe and asked, can you tell me which girl in the Wind Swallow Pavilion you are? At this moment, the servant following Huo Qian tugged at his sleeve and pointed in a direction outside the door, saying, Crown Prince, it's the woman in white. Huo Qian looked around and indeed saw the figure of a woman wearing a plain white hat. And the woman's figure was very similar to Shen Xihe's, and she sneaked downstairs. Huo Qian instantly dispelled his doubts and walked towards the door. Close the door, Huo Yunxiao ordered. I was rude. Although Huo Qian was angry in his heart, he dared not offend him and could only honestly keep the door open. After Huo Qian left, Huo Yunxiao hugged Shen Xihe and kissed him for a while before releasing him. Shen Xihe was puzzled as a white-clad woman wearing a curtain hat suddenly passed by. Huo Yunxiao scraped her nose and chuckled lightly, do you really think that this king is so reckless, ignoring everything and putting you in danger? Originally, Huo Yunxiao had already figured out a way to escape for her. After changing her clothes, Shen Xihe was taken on a fast horse by Huo Yunxiao, intending to drive her back ahead of Huo Qian. Huo Qian is not a fool. If he returns to his senses, he will surely find that we have deceived him. On his horse's back, Shen Xihe lightly wrapped his waist around Huo Yunxiao, expressing his deep worries. A hint of displeasure flashed in Huo Yunxiao's eyes and he said, why, are you afraid of being discovered by your husband for cheating? Are you afraid that Huo Qian won't want you anymore? I'm afraid he'll find out, but not because I'm worried he'll abandon me, but because I'm worried that my revenge plan will be noticed by him and become more difficult to deal with. Shen Xihe squinted slightly, his voice was colder than ever before. Huo Yunxiao finally calmed down and said more happily, don't worry, he won't notice. I had your carriage and maid stroll around the street a few times before returning to the mansion. Everyone knows that you bought rouge on West Street and jewelry on East Street today, but you haven't been to Fengyan Pavilion. Shen Xihe finally realized that when she first arrived at Fengyan Pavilion, Huo Yunxiao had noticed her. Even though she was wearing a curtain hat, Huo Yunxiao recognized her at a glance based on her figure. Huo Yunxiao knew that Huo Qian would come to Fengyan Pavilion with the group of King Yong today. He was afraid that Shen Xihe would encounter him and it would be difficult to escape, so he deliberately brought his friends into Fengyan Pavilion to drink and was always prepared. Shen Xihe was deeply moved. He didn't expect Huo Yunxiao to be so attentive and meticulous about her affairs. As soon as she returned to Yilan Courtyard, Chu Xue hurriedly pulled her into the inner room, and her anxious expression finally relaxed. Thank goodness, madam, you finally made it back. Chu Xue pushed Shen Xihe to take a shower and change clothes, while recounting the incident she encountered with Huo Yunxiao today. After Shen Xihe had taken care of everything properly, she was surprised to find someone else on her bed. After seeing the person's appearance and figure clearly, Shen Xihe was startled. The woman was wearing her clothes, with the same hair bun as her, and even her back and figure were similar. Even by looking at his facial features, he surprisingly bears a 7-point resemblance to Shen Xihe. Chu Xue was also extremely shocked in her heart. When the Prince of Zhenbei called her over today, she almost admitted her mistake through the curtain hat. If it weren't for someone familiar to carefully identify her, she could still be mistaken for real. Who are you? Why are you so similar to me? Shen Xihe asked her.